Okay, everyone, our next guest is Mr. Sal Castro. Sal served as a combat infantryman in a rifle squad that was part of the 32nd Infantry Division. He fought in the Pacific Theater and was heavily engaged in fighting Japanese in New Guinea, the Philippines, and Dutch East Indies. While recovering in a hospital in Hollandia Field, New Guinea, he witnessed the crash of the Mid-Atlantic's Air Museum's P-61 Black Widow night fighter. Please give a very warm welcome to Sal Castro.
Hello. Okay. My name is Sal Castro. When I was 18, I was in my senior year of high school, and I got greetings from the Army. Come and join us. I had to report. First place was to Fort Dix, which was October the 2nd. From there, I was transferred to Camp Landing, Florida, which, to my surprise, was an infantry replacement training center. I thought I was going to be a pilot, but really. After 17 weeks, all our training in the 17 weeks was actually for the fighting in Europe. We were to learn how to do house-to-house fighting. Nothing about jungles. And they actually had given me orders to report to Fort Meade, Maryland, which would have been to go on to Europe. At the last minute, they told us, orders changed, you're going out to Fort Ord, California, you're going to South Pacific. And we all had been given winter clothes. Went out there to San Francisco, then down to Fort Ord. We got additional training, and we got a lot of information. Among other things was that everything was expendable, including you. After our training, we loaded on a troop transport called the General R.L. Howes, and there was about 3,500 troops. We left out of San Francisco March the 20th, 1944. After 10,000 miles and 19 days later, all of us wound up on an island called Guinea Island, which is on the eastern tip of New Guinea. New Guinea is an island, the second largest island in the world. It's 1,600 miles long. We hung around the Repo Depot there on Goodenough Island for a couple of months, and we got to Goodenough on April the 9th. By about the end of April, we were transferred on to another place on the main line of New Guinea, and the place was called Finschhofen. It was another replacement depot. On about the end of June, we were loaded again on a troop transport heading west to a place called Atapi. Just to the east of, between Finschhofen and Atapi was a huge Jap base. There was approximately 55,000 Japs there. The idea of the invasion that was made at Atapi was to cut the Japs off. At the same place landing at Atapi, the Army landed also in Hollandia. I got to Atapi, New Guinea, on July the 2nd. There was a couple thousand that we all got off, and we were asked, there was a whole line of trucks, and we were all asked to get in on the trucks. And of course, for some reason, something told me, don't get in the first trucks. So I hung out and got on the very last trucks. So the area of New Guinea there, the coastline runs roughly east-west, and we were on the northern shore of New Guinea. The trucks headed due east. At the very end of the route was a place called, a river called Guinea River. Partway, when all the trucks moved out, the last trucks, which I was in, stopped and dumped us off. I found out that later I had been assigned to the 126th Regiment. The other trucks continued on further east until they got to the Guinea River. And there, they had the 127th and 128th Regiment of the 32nd Division. On July the 10th at midnight, 20,000 Japs hit the Johnneroy River along and hit the 128 and 127 Regiment. Fortunately, we didn't get bothered by them. They broke through, and eventually they wound up killing about 440 Americans. But when the fighting was done a few weeks later, we accounted for over 9,000 Japs of the original 20,000 that landed there. We spent the rest of July rounding up stragglers, but eventually by the end of July, they said that the area was secured. So we were pulled back to the rear area behind a main line of resistance, and I was assigned to a pillbox and given the ground-mounted aircraft machine gun, which had a firing rate of 1,000 rounds a minute. And I was standing on top of the pillbox with my first sergeant squad leader pointing out the fields of fire, and suddenly we heard a thud. And I looked at my feet, and here there was a round, a mortar mound. What was happening is that the weapons platoon was zeroing in their mortars, and they were setting off smoke grenades. This one, fortunately, they forgot to take the safety pin out, or I think my history would have ended right there. After it was almost like barracks life. Every day we had formation, and we got to work. The only thing we had to do was unload ships. We had a guy in our gap. We used to call him P-38 because he always talked real crazy. Today you would call him a nerd. And one of the things he would say, someday there's going to be airplanes flying so fast, they'll be going faster than sound. Of course, we thought it was crazy. And he says, yeah, there's going to be ships who are going to be going for years, submarines too, and they're going to be using something called uranium. And he said, but they'll be going for months at a time. And he said also that we expect different kinds of bombs, bigger bombs. Well, one morning, P-38, about 2 in the morning, wanders over to battalion headquarters, wakes up the commanding, the colonel, the battalion commander. It's about 2 in the morning, wakes him up, and he said, I'm General MacArthur. I want you to give the Japs a warning. If they don't surrender in 48 hours, I am going to drop a hydrogen bomb. Now, for your information, we never set off a hydrogen bomb until 1954, which was 10 years later. Next morning, P-38 was escorted out by a couple of MPs, and the last I saw of P-38, he was off to a Section 8. About 1980, I was able to contact my first sergeant, and Harney Brzett, and we got to talk, and eventually we got to P-38. And I said, whatever happened? He says, you won't believe it. He says, but he was put on a hospital ship, sent back to the States, and partway over, he jumped over the side. And his mother wrote a letter to him years later, finding out what had happened to her son, and she said he didn't have the heart to tell her what really happened to him. By this time, we were now near the end of August, and we got word that there was another invasion going on. The place was called Morotai, and it was an island in the Dutch East Indies, which today is called Indonesia. It was about 700 miles from where we were at. On September the 11th, we got on board LCIs, or landing craft infantry. They're the landing crafts with the ramps on the side. And we spent 4 days on that. Eventually, we wound up off the coast of Morotai. Our regiment, because we didn't have much of a problem at Tapi, was attached to the 31st Division, which was the main unit that attacked Morotai. They're called the Dixie Division. They landed, fortunately there was very few Japs on Morotai. So we landed on the 16th. On the 18th, we were told that our platoon, which is about 40 men, was assigned to go on a special mission to raid a Jap radar station that was located at the very tip of the island. Morotai was about 50 miles long and about 30 miles wide. On the night of the 18th, we got aboard a special LCI, landing craft infantry, that's been modified and was loaded with over 100 rockets. It was a rocket launching LCI. We spent the night going up, and the next morning we could hear the firing and hear a destroyer was going back and forth across the shore, blasting the shoreline in preparation. Finally, we got the word to get on board the landing crafts. We got on board what they call LCMs, they're smaller landing craft. And we headed in, and at this time, I was carrying a BAR, and I can remember checking it out as we were motoring in. Eventually, we felt the craft hit the ground. That's all, we're on the beach. The ramp dropped, and to my horror, we were about 100 yards from the end of the beach, and my first thought was Tarawa. And I said, oh no, not again. And we had to wade in about at least waist deep, and I'm just wondering if we were going to survive it. We finally made it to the beach, and we found that the Japs had taken off to the hills, and there was still food cooking on the island. A group went up to the mountain. At the top of the mountain, we could see this radar. It looked like a huge bed spring, and they blew it up. And we set up our own system. We set up a perimeter, and as a few days would go by, we'd get more and more reinforcements. Eventually, the perimeter got larger and larger. When it got fairly big, we had a what they call Amtrak, or they're sometimes called a buffalo or an alligator. It's a troop carrier, but has tank treads on it. And he ran back and forth and across in front of our perimeter to flatten the jungle, so that any Japs tried to sneak up on us, we would be able to tell about it. One moonlit night, I was in the foxhole and looking out, and I couldn't believe my eyes. 3 Japs were coming towards me with fixed bayonets. It was a moonlit night, and they had nice chrome-plated blades, so they shined real nice. So I cocked my BAR, and when they got to about 25 yards from me, I blew them out. And next morning I looked out there, here was one dead Jap, but the other 2 were gone, but I could see a lot of blood there. So apparently they had gotten away. I found out later, from a couple of days later, patrols came back, and they had found the other 2 dead Japs. A few nights later, by this time we had lost it. It was overhead, a lot of cloudy. And I'm in my foxhole again, and I could hear crunching in front of it, coming towards me, and it's getting closer and closer. So very quietly, I pulled back the cocking mechanism, and about halfway through, it jammed. I pushed forward, it wouldn't go forward, it wouldn't go back, and I'm panicking, and the sound is getting closer and closer. I had practiced many times disassembling the BAR blindfolded. So one of the procedures, you take a bullet and use it, feel around, and apparently I found a pin that had slipped, and when I pushed it in, the bolt slammed forward, and the sound stopped. And I looked up ahead, and finally I looked, and here it was, a possum. It was climbing up close to me. So after I changed my underwear, it wasn't too bad from there on out. We were there about a little over a month, and we were sent back to our unit because we were at the very northern tip of the island, and we were replaced by the 164th Regiment people from the 31st Division. And we went back down to the southern part of the island, and by this time we had learned the Army had landed on Leyte. They landed on October the 20th. And we were told we were going to go in and reinforce them. Because of the Battle of the Philippine Seas there, they held us back. It wasn't until November the 10th that we boarded the Fayette, was a troop carrier, headed north to Leyte. On our way there, they sounded general quarters, and we all went down below, and there was an awful lot of firing going on. We came on, finally when they sounded all clear, they told us that a Jap kamikaze made a shot at us and headed for our troop ship. And fortunately they hit it and exploded, or it would have hit our ship. We landed on the Leyte, and all the regiments went into the mountains to relieve the men from the 24th Division because they had been there almost a month fighting, and they were pretty well beat up. Our regiment, our battalion, fortunately was held back as in reserve on the northern shore of the Leyte. There's a bay there called the Karagari Bay, and we were positioned in a village there called Penamapoan, and we were held there in position. We got there about the 16th or 17th of November. And so we're waiting, getting us, it was pretty easy living at that time. And one day I happened to look out and I see two of my buddies talking to a Filipino. And the Filipino's got this chicken under his arm. And so I was curious to see what the heck is going on there with these guys. And I go over there and I said, what's going on? He saw the guy wants a whole set of underwear. And we don't have any underwear on. And I said, I do. He says, that's what we need for the chicken? Great. I kicked my shoes off, dropped my pants, took off my underwear, handed them over to the Filipino, and there I am standing with, in one hand I've got the chicken in my pants in the other, thinking I really had a good deal. A shell lands near us in an rice paddy in front of us. And next thing, there's another shell lands on a beach behind us. We thought it was the weapons guys again firing. Here I found out eventually, after a couple of shells, that was the Japs doing it. And they were zeroing on us. So needless to say, we spent a lot of nervous days. They weren't sending too many shells. They were sending more shells. The fortunate thing is that you could hear them coming. So it was like a flutter. And we would stand in line there in the chow line, and everybody would scatter. And I remember Thanksgiving Day. Roosevelt had promised that we would all have turkey for Thanksgiving. And sure enough, I can remember standing in line with pouring rain, and we could hear the fluttering, and boy, we all scattered out of line. Everybody hit for a hole. When they landed, the stormtrooper next to us, we all jumped back in the line and got our turkey. And I can remember the mess cook gave me the hind quarter of a turkey, and I went back to my foxhole, and it was right next to a coconut tree, and I leaned up against there with my poncho, and the pouring rain eating away that turkey. And I can tell you that I've eaten in better places and better ambiance, but I'll tell you that really tastes good. So we were getting ready. Finally, now we're getting into the end of December. I'm sorry, the beginning of December. And on December the 3rd, we got orders that we were going ahead. Apparently, Company I had been surrounded, and they were out of water and ammunition. So we were going to resupply them. So our company other companies of the battalion had already been committed to the battle, and we were eventually told to move out. So we started moving out, and we started getting up into the hills. And I noticed when I remember seeing the first dead Jap. In fact, I actually smelled him before I saw him. And when I got around there, I saw him, and I held my breath to get past him. It wasn't too far. I saw two more dead Japs, and I stopped holding my breath. Eventually, I could see piles of dead Japs. And because they had been dead for a month, there were just a pile of bones. One pile I saw, I think I stopped counting, 20 skulls. That was them in there. And we continued on, and our objective was about 3 miles away. Well, this time was, the hills were vertical, almost getting up and down. And you have to remember, I was carrying a BAR which weighed 19 pounds, an ammo belt that weighed 13 pounds, a pack and a steel helmet. And my assistant, Jimmy Bach, also carried a belt. Partway through the walk, Jimmy started complaining. He says he can't walk anymore. So I grabbed the ammo belt. So now I've got 26 pounds carrying. And about that time I weighed about not 140. And I'm walking along, so it finally started to get dark. And the squad leader said, we'll form a defense perimeter. So I snuggled up inside of a banyan tree. The banyan tree is a tree that has these huge webs that are the roots. So you can get inside and hide. So I sat in there, and as it got darker, I was thinking, I'm not going to sleep. I'm staying awake all night. And I looked out, and of course, by that time it was black, as dark as the inside of your pocket. I couldn't see anything, and I'm looking out there and listening, and suddenly I remember it got bright, and I could hear some movement around. And it suddenly occurred to me I had fallen asleep, and this was morning, daylight. And needless, I jumped up, and we fell in line. We started finishing the trek through the jungles. Our objective was a place called Hairpin Turn, and it was because we were accustomed to the jungles were fairly dense, and I could see it's getting brighter and brighter. Here, there was the end of the jungle, and it ended almost in a cliff, and we could see down and beyond. Ahead of us was this long piece of land that almost looked like a wall. The sides of it must have been at least 60 degrees, and the wall was about at least 100 feet, and at the bottom of it was a road that had been in there. And then you could see there was a lot of fighting that had been going on there because there was no vegetation on it. And it was clear, so there was no really good cover. So we all stretched out on this land, which this piece of land was about maybe 800 yards long and about 30, 40 yards wide. It wasn't very wide, but there had been foxholes already dug in there. So all of us lined up, each grabbed a foxhole, and I remember the guy next to me was Lancaster. He dug in there, and during the night, Lancaster decided to get up to relieve himself, and somebody shot him and killed him. And the next morning, that would be the 5th of December, we suddenly started to get income, and we started getting a lot of artillery fire, I think, or mortar shells. And by the time the day was over, they killed 4 of our men, and 4 were wounded. So we spent a rather harrowing night. So the following morning, on December the 6th, we moved out, and our platoon, which is about the whole company is about 200 men. So our platoon is made these point platoon, and of course our squad was made the point squad. So that we were sort of like the chum, the bait in the front. And we had scouts who went out in front of us. And I remember the scout, his name was Chicken. He was a little tiny guy. I don't think he weighed 100 pounds, but he was very fast. And I always remember he always carried a Thompson submachine gun. And he was ahead of us. And next thing we heard some grenades going off. And of course everybody hit the ground. And after about 20 minutes of grenades firing, Chicken comes back again. And he said, he was a southern boy. And he says, you hear all them grenades? He says, that ain't ours. And he said, there's some Japs. He says, he pointed out to a lung where he said they were hiding behind. So my platoon sergeant told me, fire into that, where the trees are. Because they had fired a grenade at a tree above them and was able to hit them because you could hear them screaming. One guy was badly wounded. This was a Jap. And so I fired the BAR, and I'm about to load up my second clip, and I could hear some Japs overhead because we were on the embankment of a road below it, and they were apparently up in the road. I could hear them Japs hollering, and all of a sudden I could hear the unmistakable sound of a hand grenade being armed, because it sounds like a 22. And the grenade, I could hear it flop and it landed out about maybe 50 yards from me, and I looked up to see where the explosion came from, and I could see a guy who was doing like push-ups, and I said, what the heck is this guy doing exercises? And when he turned his head facing me, he had no face. The grenade had gotten off in his face and blew away. I never knew to this day who it was. And more grenades came in, and this time one grenade landed in front of me. It was within about 10 feet. My buddy, Jim Bleckinger, was in front of me, and the grenade landed right next to his side, and before I could say anything, I threw my arm over my helmet, and it went off. And surprisingly, I didn't feel anything. The only thing I felt was like a sting in my little finger. Aside, I didn't feel any of that. And Jimmy, my assistant, we both looked at each other because he had gotten wounded. And I told him, you look okay. And he said, you look okay. I wasn't okay. I could suddenly feel the blood going down my arm. I couldn't hold my VAR because it was slipping out. And with that, I think I passed out, and I fell down the hill to the bottom. And I lay there, and I think I vaguely remembered my first sergeant hollering, pull back, they're going to bring in heavy weapons. And I could vaguely remember that. And they're pulling away and leaving me behind because I think they must have thought I was dead. And I finally came to my senses and threw off my ammo belt and just carried the BAR. And I crawled up the side of the hill to get back with the unit. And it's a nightmare I still have of trying to get back to my unit because I thought they left me. I finally got to the medic, and he passed me up, and they formed a column of wounded and took them back to a battalion aid station. And there I spent the night and slept on the ground. And the following morning, this would have been December the 7th, I woke up and they said, come on, we're moving out, because they were forming another column to go back further in the rear area. As I'm walking by, I had no weapon, and I happened to see a hand grenade, and someone said, pick it up. So I put it in my pocket, and we start to move out. Partway on the trip, we start to get fire. A Jap sniper in a spider hole was firing on us. And so they returned the fire, but they couldn't get him. So somebody hollered out in the front, does anybody have a grenade? And I had pulled it out of my pocket and passed it out. And next thing I heard it go off, and when I could hear some rapid fire, they said, okay, move out. So we're moving, and here the Jap was laying on the side of the trail. And as I looked at him, I looked down, he's still breathing. So I hollered out, this SOB is still alive. So the medic came over and said, oh yeah. So he takes his carbine and puts a bullet in his head. And he says, that takes care of him. So later on, we were able to get to a place where we could load on trucks. Took me to the rear area. And there I went to what today you would call a MASH unit. And there the doctors took care of my wounds. And I had shrapnel on my side, chest, arm, and in my hand. So he passed me up as best he could. I hadn't eaten for about 2 days by this time. So he fed me. He says, here, have this. He gave me, I remember, a saltine with cherry preserves on it and a hot cup of cocoa. And with that, he followed it with a shot of whiskey. And I went out like a light. I never woke up until the following morning. And because of the fall, I must have injured my back because I couldn't move. And he said, don't move, because they had taken all my clothes off because they would check me over, and the only thing was a blanket over me. So they carried me on a litter to the shore, and what they were doing is they had a bigger hospital further to the east of the island. And so the best way of moving us was by landing craft. They loaded me out there and took me into the hospital there. And from there they said, we can't take care of you. So they put me on a hospital ship on the 29th of December and spent New Year's Day going to back to Hollandia. I got to Hollandia around the 2nd or 3rd of January, and I was assigned into the 51st General Hospital in Hollandia. And I was in there, and eventually the doctor says, the best thing to do nothing, leave you alone. And so I was waiting to get sent back to my unit. And I remember I was in the day room, and I heard a plane zoom over our hospital. And we all jumped, bailed out and looked to see. And we circled around, and here we could see B-61 circling over the hospital. And he was flying over us like 500 feet. What he would do is he would climb. There was a mountain at the side of the hospital they called Mount Cyclops. He would climb around. By this time, we could see him making the second pass. And he cleared it. He came around the third time. This time, his engine failed. And he was over the jungle canopy, not very far enough that he couldn't dive. It wouldn't crash. And he crashed into the jungles. And I found out later that they all survived. But I found out later, what they were doing is they were joyriding nurses from the hospital. And of course, the official explanation was that they were on a training mission and that they lost an engine. I think if they ever told the truth, what they really did, I think they all wound up in a brig. And from there, I had the problems with jungle rot, and it almost killed me. I had gotten an infection. If it weren't for penicillin, I don't think I would have survived it. And one day a colonel came to the hospital ward and he said, asked me how long you've been here. I said about 2 months. He says, okay, you can go home. Well, I can tell you I know how it is to win the lottery, because I had no idea I was going to go home. And put on the hospital ship and got back to San Francisco and went back country. And eventually I wound up in the Letterman General Hospital, or Tilton General Hospital in Fort Dix. And from there, I got assigned to an MB battalion in Manhattan. And there I got sent back to Fort Dix for discharge. And on December the 24th, nice Christmas present, they said, you're no longer in the Army. And I said, thank you.